So begins day number 9. Warm last night. Didn't drop into anything other than like the high 60s Fahrenheit. It's supposed to be a nice day again. Mid 80s Fahrenheit for the high. And I am heading across to Macon. It's about a 4-hour drive where there is a Civil War site I'm going to go see, as well as some ancient mounds. It sounds like similar to what I saw up in Ohio. So it should be a good day of riding. I'm all packed up, other than put my gear on and ready to go. This is the Griswoldville Battlefield down here to the east of Macon, Georgia. This is Griswoldville, a battle fought late in the war between the North and the South. Let's get off and take a look. So imagine, if you would, it's 1864 in November, and the Civil War has been going on for several years now. Sherman, who's operating independently from General Grant, is in the West, coming across Georgia. He left Atlanta November 15th, 1864, and his goal was nothing less than to cut a large swath through the center of Georgia, basically destroying everything in its path. His army had cut itself from supply lines that were provided from the west, and as he moved his way east, he basically had his army eat its way across Georgia. They cut a swath 60 miles wide, eating the food that came from the breadbasket of Georgia. And the goal was to essentially deprive General Lee, who Grant was facing in the east, from being able to replenish food for his troops. So a little over a week after Sherman left Atlanta, one of the brigades, Charles Wolcott, ran into the Confederates at this spot here at the Battle of Griswoldville. And so the Union Army was coming here from the right, and the Confederacy was building a line on the left. Now, at this point in the war, this is less than a year before the end of the Civil War, the Confederate Army was starting to get worn down pretty severely. And so this battle that took place here was fairly lopsided, in that the brigade that was facing the Confederates was some of the best that the Federals had, and they actually, a number of them had Henry repeating rifles as opposed to single-shot rifles. So when the Confederates made their charge across this field, they basically got slaughtered by the Union. There's really, at this point in the war, nothing that the Confederates could do to stop Sherman's huge army moving across Georgia other than to slow it down. And this battle hardly did even that. So this is a high water mark right here for where the Confederates made their way up to the Union line before they got decimated, turned around, and went back in that direction. I'll give you a quote from what one of the Union soldiers said after the battle took place, where there were men dead and dying on the field of battle, almost all of which were Confederates. He said, "Old gray-haired and weakly-looking men and young boys not over 15 years old lay dead or writhing in pain. I hope we will never have to shoot at such men again." In one sense, it was a completely unnecessary battle. It didn't stop Sherman. He eventually made his way to the east coast of the United States, and in 1865, Confederacy eventually surrendered to General Grant at the courthouse in Appomattox. The other thing that Sherman's army did, other than eating its way across Georgia and destroying crops that it wasn't able to eat, was that it tore up railroad tracks wherever it could, because railroads were obviously a fairly efficient way to move produce, goods to the Confederate troops over in Virginia. And when they did that, so that the Confederates couldn't move in behind them and rebuild those lines, they would take the railroad ties, put them over a great fire, and bend them around trees so that they were basically unusable rails. They were given the nickname Sherman's neckties. They just wreaked complete destruction here in Georgia. So now we're going to go over to Ocmulgee, I believe it's pronounced, Mounds, only 14 miles away, where there's a heritage site. My new motorcycle gear is working extremely well. It's 82 degrees. The app, my weather app, says it feels like it's 93 degrees Fahrenheit. And when I'm riding, it's fine. When I got off the bike there at Griswoldville, you can definitely feel the heat, and the fact that the jacket, without a breeze blowing over it, retains a certain amount of the heat, although it's a pretty warm day. But I'm still very impressed with the coat. So really no complaints. I think even if I had my ventilated jacket on that I left back at home, it would probably still felt about the same. We are on the outskirts of Macon, Georgia. I've seen these wood trucks all over Georgia. I don't know the kind of wood, but it's typically the way they carry it. We are at the Ocmulgee Earthworks here near, I guess we're in Macon, Georgia. Going to the visitor center, see what there is to see, and see how they compare to the Newark Earthworks up in Ohio.
During the 1930s, they had 600 to 800 men and women working here to archaeologically dig up
the Ocmulgee National Monument and do excavation to uncover the archaeological remains of what was here. Ocmulgee Mounds dates back to 900 to 1100 AD. These are some of the Ocmulgee artifacts that they uncovered as part of their dig. The Mississippians were the ones that were living here and created the mounds. The Mississippians were a farming community, lived here for around 250 years. That's really cool. A Lamar human head effigy pipe. Birdstone effigy pipe. Here's some more pottery. How cool is that? A human effigy bottle. The way that they surmise they built the mounds, basketful by basketful. Here's a diorama of the Earth Lodge that we'll see here in a few minutes. A copper headdress fashioned with jawbones and fangs of a mountain lion. I didn't realize there were so many mounds in the eastern part of the United States. So up in the upper right there is Hopewell, where I was. And then you can see Ocmulgee there in the middle. So the Hopewell Mounds were in the Woodland period, 1000 BC to 900 AD. And the Ocmulgee Mounds are the Mississippian period, 900 to 1540 AD. Mississippian arrowheads. Here are the Woodland arrowheads that predated the Mississippians. Tools.
Yeah, that may be something that you want to ask.
So to give some perspective here, we're at the visitor center. I walk down this path towards the Earth Lodge. Village site, there's a funeral mound on my right, trading post site. And if I get all the way down there, it's about a half a mile, the Great Temple Mound. So that in the distance is the Earth Lodge.
The Earth Lodge, the Great Temple Mound, the Funeral Mound, and the Ocmulgee River. I finally heard the pronunciation of it. I mispronounced it before. What's kind of interesting is that these mounds, some of them apparently look similar to the mounds that are down in Mexico with, I think, the Aztec people. So one of the theories is that people from that region migrated up here, became the Mississippians, and ultimately built these mounds. Here is the Earth Lodge. Twice a year during the solstices, the sun is exactly aligned with this entry, and the sun shines back to where the throne of the leader was. So this was uncovered by the Civilian Conservation Corps back in the 1930s. I believe the roof is a reconstruction, but they found 47 seats that encircle or partially encircle the throne. And the four corners of the roof are aligned perfectly with north, south, east, and west. So I just pulled out my compass that's on my phone as an app. And sure enough, this corridor runs due east. So to my right is the Earth Lodge, and directly ahead, there with the flat top on it, is called the Cornfield Mound. I don't know whether you can hear it or not, but the cicadas are out today here in Georgia. And you might also be able to hear a train going by. And the train in the 1800s, the line was run through here and actually destroyed part of one of the burial mounds, crossing over the train track to the other side where some more of the mounds are located. So the flat-topped mound to the left is known as the Great Temple Mound. Flat-top mound, smaller one to the right, is the Lesser Temple Mound. They don't know exactly how each of them was used, but the large one had 3 buildings on top at one point through the archaeological dig, and the Lesser Temple Mound had 1. And then in front here with that outline, that was a trading post at one point many years ago. So it's just the outline of a more modern being a relative term, I guess, more modern archaeological site. So the trading post was 1690 to 1715. Looking back at the visitor center. So that is the Ocmulgee Mounds National Historic Site. Very cool place, given its age and what they've excavated there. I am going to refill my water bladder and start heading to the state park, which is only about half an hour away. It's pretty warm out. Well, I am riding back to the burial mounds. Just give myself a little bit of a walk in these hot temperatures. That's where I took the view from. And back here, which I photographed earlier, are the burial mounds, which we will stop at. When they dug within the mounds, they found 100 burial sites, as well as log tombs and structures at different levels. The structure was built up apparently over several stages based on their archaeology. The present height is the 3rd stage, estimated to be 280 feet long, 100 feet wide, and 25 feet tall. I am going to find myself a grocery store. I think there's one fairly close to the campground, and put my camp up for the evening and have dinner. That is the plan. There is my trusty motorcycle. Almost time for another servicing of the engine chain. I've got a couple thousand miles more before I have to change the oil in the filter. I did bring along a filter with me this time, and I brought a pan that I'm stowing some of my oil changing and chain maintenance equipment in, but it's also going to serve as an oil pan that has a top on it. So I'm hoping to do my own oil change in the field and not have to rely on some shop to do that for me. I'll try to do it at some auto supply store that will allow me to immediately dump the oil. You can see the Michelin Anarchy Adventure tires, which have about, I think, 1,600 miles on them now so far on this trip. Almost all of it's come from this trip. So still in good shape. And I think I've got about a half an hour or so riding, so not much left on this absolutely delightful but very warm day. So I'm off. Ocmulgee Mounds, National Historic Park. Worth a visit if you're in the area. Alright, here we go. It's a big recreation area. Arrowhead Park is where my campground is. Out in the sunshine. And not quite a level spot. So it took a little doing with the slope to try to get my bike to angle properly. I think I'm okay. It's in gear, obviously, so it's not going to roll downhill. The question is whether I'm going to roll downhill all night long with this slope. I don't really see any better camping spots for tents. Or maybe I'll go right down where the picnic table is. That's probably what I'll do, put it right up against the picnic table, try to get myself a level spot. Alright, in any event, arrived. There's a lake there. Sun's starting to set, so hopefully I'll be in the shade for the rest of the day. Get myself food off the back of the bike, have some dinner, but not until I set up the tent. Not the best setup in the world, but I think it'll do. I'm hungry. Time to eat. What is it I have for dinner, you ask? Why, I just so happen to have taken a picture of it. Got a Southwest tender wrap, banana, like I usually get. A nice slice of carrot cream cheese cake. 1,030 calories per slice. Oh my gosh. That's outrageous. Sun chips, Dr. Pepper, diet, and reduced fat milk. So that's for dessert. It's going to be a good dinner. Nice evening here. It's starting to cool down just a little bit. Good morning. It's day number 10, and it's about 7 o'clock in the morning on a Thursday. Good night's sleep last night here at the Arrowhead campground. There's dew everywhere. My bike is covered with it, my tent is covered with it. There's a lake down there. I don't know whether you can see it or not, but last night there were power boats. They were running well after dark. That made a little bit of noise, but then they quieted down probably between 11 and 12. So I spent the morning, I was up at 6, dressed my chain so the bike is all ready to go, and looking forward to the ride today. Here's my breakfast this morning. I've got a yogurt, a 2-day-old donut, chocolate-covered donut that went through some pretty warm temperatures yesterday, so I don't know how well that survived. Got fresh fruit there on the right and some milk. So I'm just gonna finish this off. I'm gonna have to put the tent away wet because it's gonna take too long for it to dry. And I can't wait around that long. Today we're gonna go drive or ride down to the Andersonville prison camp. It was a POW camp used by Confederates infamously during the Civil War, where thousands of men died of disease and confinement. And there's a military grave there, as well as some markers to mark the site. So I'm going to do that and then head down further into or over into Alabama and south. And here we are, a lovely sunrise. Lots of birds out again, which I love. It's 8 o'clock, day number 10. So Andersonville is about an hour away. So off to a little bit of a cool start, mid-60s. Supposed to be good weather today, and it looks like it. I have 2 trip meters on this bike. One that I leave on, zeroed out at the beginning of the trip so I can keep track of my total mileage. That right now is showing as 1,728.5 miles. And trip meter number 2, I reset whenever I service my chain. So it's just an easy way for me to keep track of it. So I service it between every 500 and 600 miles. Kind of get conflicting advice in terms of how often to do it. I think it's somewhat dependent on how dirty it looks. Suzuki says every 600 miles. The chain manufacturer says every 500 miles. So it's a quick and easy way to keep track of the mileage that I've consumed since my last service on the chain. And then on the oil, I just keep track of that on a note within my phone. It's every 3,500 miles. It is really nice out. I've only got no layers on actually, other than my shirt and my jacket. Everything's zipped up. While I spent a fair amount of time with my gear when it arrived, my personal gear when it arrived in the mail to make sure it fit properly, I didn't really spend a lot of time looking at all the zips and vents and everything. I probably should have spent more time familiarizing myself with it, because I found an extra set of vents on the pants that I wasn't aware of when I was looking at it this morning. So as the temperatures warm up, and I'm probably an hour or two away from that, I'll start opening up the vents. Try to keep myself cool today. Andersonville National Historic Site. This is a Civil War POW camp where thousands of men died due to the poor conditions here and the transmission of disease. There's a cemetery here as well. I had not been here before. I haven't read a lot about it. I hope to learn more on this visit. Alright, take off some of my gear and go on in. So this is a memorial to all Americans held as prisoners of war, not just related to the Civil War. Museum architecture is not based on a specific place, but to evoke prison guards, tower, and stockades in general.
These two very sobering lobby signs show what happened exactly 160 years before the date of my visit on May 2nd.
This is a woman in POW's flight suit. She was an Army flight surgeon, Major Rhonda Cornum. Shut down the Persian Gulf War in 1991, held as a POW for 8 days, had 2 broken arms and a dislocated knee. Let's picture her getting off the aircraft coming home. This is a POW suit from Andersonville. It's made of heavy linen. These are straw sandals worn in a Japanese POW camp by George Mayberry. The original lock, key, and hinge from the south gate of Andersonville Stockade. Confederate guards kept watch over the compound from 52 towers surrounding the prison stockade. The dead line, about 19 feet within the walls, was a boundary no man could cross without being shot by a guard. This is some of the handcrafted work done in Andersonville Prison during the Civil War. Clean little puzzle box and rings. Neckerchief slides. That is a chest set carved by a corporal at Andersonville from bone, and below is a storage box. This shows all the POW camps north and south during the Civil War. So the Union captured 462,000, almost 463,000 prisoners, of which 28,000 died in captivity. The Confederates captured 211,000 prisoners, and over 30,000 of them died. So both the North and the South had significant death rates in their prisons. This is the center hallway of the POW Museum. All kinds of artifacts and displays on the walls. Well, first I'm going to go to the prison site, which is where the Andersonville Prison stood. And then I'll go to the National Cemetery before I make my exit down to southern Alabama. The prison here at Andersonville was here because of 2 reasons. One, they wanted to have a prison site, the Confederates did, away from the current battles, so that to the extent that they lost a battle, they didn't want to end up having all the Northerners repatriated back to the Union where they might be able to fight again. So they put it down here in southern Georgia. Two, the land was relatively inexpensive, and it was sitting amongst farmland where that they were hoping would be able to feed the men during their internment. There's not much of the fort that's left. It was wooden stockades that sealed the men in. It was designed for 10,000 men, and I think at its peak it was over 30,000 men that were interned here. There was a creek that ran through the prison, but the problem with it was, A, it was very small, and so it would have struggled to provide water for 10,000 men, let alone 30,000 men. And B, it was contaminated because of the fact that the Confederate guards were upstream of it, and they contaminated it through their activities. And then by the time it reached down into the prison, it apparently was just a trickle of water that was barely enough for the men to survive. In fact, many of them did not. So it was terrible living conditions. The food was not, in fact, enough to be able to supply the prisoners. And so a lot of them starved. But I think most of them died of dysentery and diarrhea because of the contaminated food and the close living conditions. The shelters inside the camp were entirely up to the men, the prisoners, to build themselves. There were not buildings put inside, so these guys would try to hobble together tents and canvas shelters to give them some protection from especially from the Georgia hot summers. It started in early 1864 and continued through to the end of the war. So it was in service for probably a year and a half. Oh, and the other reason that I neglected to mention why they placed the prison here is because it was near a railroad. So as Union soldiers were captured, they were put on the railroads and shipped into the Deep South. So I'm standing within the prison right now, and after the war, a number of states came and put up monuments for the men that served here. Commander of the camp, I think was a captain for the Confederacy, was tried after the war up in Washington, D.C., and ultimately hanged after he was found guilty of a number of charges against him for this terrible conditions that were here. But it's interesting to note that the Confederate prison guards were not actually all that much better off. They were hungry as well, but clearly not to the same degree that the Union soldiers were. There was one interesting story that was given because of that terrible stream. I forgot whether it was 1864 or 1865, but I think we're going to be able to see it. During a rainstorm, apparently a new spring sprung up in what's called the dead zone, which provided water to the camp and a fair amount of abundance, and was clean as well. So it was almost miraculous that it was created, and the prisoners really viewed it as a godsend that they were finally able to drink potable water. And I think talking to the park ranger, who actually spent a half an hour with me before I went and watched a half an hour film, she said that the spring is still visible, so hopefully we'll pass that here shortly. This is a commemoration for Clara Barton, the woman who I think I described earlier up in Antietam. And she came down here after the war, immediately after the war, in order to try to organize the cemetery and put markers in where the soldiers were buried. The original Andersonville was 16.5 acres designed for 10,000 men with a 15-foot high stockade around the outside. By August of that year, 32,000 were there. They did increase the size of it to 26.5 acres. But you can imagine 32,000 men on 26.5 acres. With that many men here, it was, I think, the 5th largest city in the South, which is just absolutely crazy. 13,000 soldiers died here. Over 13,000. All right, I'm going to continue my ride down. But it went in through the stockade, which slowed the speed of the stream down. Not that there's much water passing through here right now. and turned it into a sludgy mess within the camp, because it did cut through the camp. The stockade had only 2 entrances in its 3/4 mile perimeter. This trail follows the footsteps of newly arriving prisoners in the north gate. They marched from the village railroad station past this spot uphill to the north gate, the main prison entrance. Here I've arrived at Providence Spring on my way up to the north gate. During a heavy rainstorm on August 14, 1864, a spring suddenly gushed from this hillside. The event became legendary. Several men claimed to have seen a lightning strike at the spot just before the spring burst forth. And it's still providing water today. It was erected in 1901 for the reflection pool. Here's the recreation of the infamous North Gate. A lot of men came through. A lot of men did not come out alive. Here is a old photograph. Gives you some sense for the density of the population here at Andersonville. You'd never guess the misery when you stand here today. Here's a representation of the dead line set back from the wall, which is the post right next to me, and left a free space where if you stepped over that line, you could get shot or would get shot by the guards. So it kept men away from the wall. I know that the Germans used that during World War II. I presume other POW camps in other wars have used a similar concept. Sentry boxes or pigeon roosts were mounted every 100 feet along the top of the stockade. The guards had orders to shoot any prisoner who crossed the deadline, which we talked about earlier. Perched above the camp, the guards themselves became prisoners of tedium and anxiety, and the stench and the view across the acres of ragged men must have numbed their senses. Apparently they called the shelters shebangs. They provided their own shelters with sticks and pieces of clothing. Prisoners improvised leaky tents and lean-tos. Many prisoners had no shelter at all, so there was no protection from the rain, the dew, broiling sun. All became a matter of life or death. I can tell you, it's hot today. I can't imagine sitting out here without any shade. And this is only May. August must just sizzle down here. Oh, I'm going over to the cemetery. So these were not mass burials, these were trench burials. So they would dig a long trench and the bodies would be laid shoulder to shoulder, so you'll see that the headstones are very close together. But apparently there's very few unknown soldiers that are buried here, which is a credit to the people that came in afterwards, including Clara Barton, who worked to make sure that they all had a headstone. This cemetery began as a burial place for 12,920 Union soldiers who died in Andersonville Prison. Established as a national cemetery on July 26, 1865. Clara Barton was here on August 17, 1865, along with a prisoner by the name of Dorrance Atwater, who helped with the identification. Prisoners' headstones are only inches apart. The death rate that escalated to 100 per day. Officials abandoned the use of pine box coffins and had the bodies buried shoulder to shoulder in the trenches. Of course, the men came from all over the north. Joseph Hagman, Pennsylvania. W.S. Rousey, West Virginia. Henry Riggs, Indiana. M.W. Hunter, Corporal, out of Michigan. S.P. Richardson, Massachusetts, unknown soldier. J.N.O. Nelson, Missouri. W. Snow, Tennessee. S.P. Bailey, Vermont. And the list goes on. All men that had families, friends, some had children, wives. So that concludes my visit to Andersonville. I still have 4 hours of riding, almost 200 miles to go. It's 12:30 in the afternoon, so I got to get myself going here. I was hoping to do laundry today, but I don't know if that's going to happen, since I need to obviously get to my campsite, have dinner, and relax a bit. And I got a long hot ride ahead of me. So here we go. Onwards. Look at that red Georgia soil. Don't see it up in New England. Yeah, I was expecting to see this here in Georgia. I'm approaching the state line. I think it's Alabama. Chattahoochee River. Leaving Georgia, going into Sweet Home, Alabama. The roads have been pretty wide open. I've gone through a few small towns, but must have been this. It's up to 89 degrees, and my suit is doing very well. I've got all the vents open on it. The only time it feels really warm or hot is when I stop, but I don't know if there's any suit that's going to make you feel cool when it's 89 degrees out. Even my ventilated suit, I used to get hot with that, so I'm pretty pleased with it. I think it's proven itself from, on least trip, from 45 degrees Fahrenheit all the way up to 89. I guess my bike is saying it's 90 degrees Fahrenheit. I just broke 2,000 miles on this trip. I am in southern Alabama, about 15 minutes from my campsite, and just north of the panhandle of Florida. This is the first come first served campsite. Really hard to get information on it. Run by the National Forest Service, I believe, is the responsible governmental entity. It's good they have a sign, open pond recreation area. So this doesn't look like I'm coming in quite through the back door. Nice. All right. I actually gained an hour today. I'm in the central time zone of the U.S. when I crossed over into Alabama. So right now, it's still getting late here in even central time. It's 5:30, which is 6:30 Eastern time. So I've been on the road for 9.5 hours, including the 3-hour stop at the National Historical Park at Andersonville. So it's getting to be a long day. I do have groceries. I bought myself a hot sandwich at the grocery store, a couple hot sandwiches, because they only sold them in pair. The important question now is, can I get a campsite because this is first come first serve. It's Thursday. The campground last night was fairly empty, so I'm guessing I'll be able to get into this, but again, I don't know. Rather deserted road. Not sure if I know how to pronounce the name of this National Forest area. This is the open pond recreation area, but that National Forest has another name. Wow, it's even paved going back. That's surprising. This is not a primitive campground, so maybe I shouldn't be surprised. They do have running water and I think flush toilets. These National Forest campgrounds are relatively cheap. If you take a site without power, I think they're like $8 a night. If you take one that does have power, they're $16 a night, so they're a relative bargain compared to what some of these state parks are getting up to these days, where it's $40, $50 a night. In certain areas of the country, you can actually get a motel room about that cost. The U.S. Department of Agriculture, Congaree National Forest, open pond recreation area, camping, fishing, hiking, and picnicking to the right. There's a sign there that said, "No swimming, beware of alligators." So I guess I don't want a campsite next to the water in a tent. They have such a thing. We are close to Florida, and Florida has the gators. So I guess Alabama has them too. Not that I see any. Well, I'll be. There's actually another motorcycle camper here. That's the first on this trip. don't see many of them. I'm really surprised. I don't know why. Alright, so I got to register here. And I don't know whether I have to ride back and take a look first, probably. Alright, so the daily fee, $16 with hookups, $8 without hookups. America the Beautiful passport discount, and I've got a similar pass for national parks, is $4 for a night. Occupy the campsite, note the number, return within minutes, or fill out and close fee, display on dashboard, deposit envelope in fee box. So let me go see if I can find myself a place to camp. Pass is honored here. Here we go. Yeah, I got the senior pass. That's one benefit of being an older guy. It's saved me so much money. Alright, I don't see a map of the campground. Let's rock and roll. Go back there and find a spot to set up. So I'm going to look for something without hookups. Lupe, primitive campsites, no water and electrical hookup. Hopefully they have potable water back here. Yeah, there's no issue with finding a spot. I'm going to end up near the water anyways. Great. Alright, time to unpack. Alright, here we are, site A9. Gonna set up camp before I have dinner. It is sticky and warm. Alright, we have a barbecue sandwich, some watermelon, cake for dessert. Grapefruit was supposed to be for breakfast, but I think it's broken open, so I probably need to eat it tonight. Some sweet tea and a banana. That's for dinner, and here is my view.